chaplains in World War I were responsible for the emotional and spiritual welfare of the troops. Daily duties for chaplains would include giving sermons and running services, providing sort of counsel and spiritual solace to the men. And one of the most important duties they had was burying the dead.
And at Gallipoli, that was a very busy job.
One of the collections we have here is the collection of the Reverend William Maitland Woods, an Anglican minister, and he worked in parishes in Cairns and Townsville and Dalby, and he was the rector of St Mary's Anglican Church up at Kangaroo Point.
Maitland-Woods was definitely a scholarly person.
He was born in England and moved to Australia. He was an Oxford graduate. He was assigned to the Light Horse and he went to Gallipoli with the 7th Light Horse. And by the end of the war, he was the senior chaplain with Chevelle's Anzac Mounted Division. So he spent most of his war in the desert in Egypt and Palestine.
We expect to be going into action again soon, and it seems almost certain that the General is taking me. Of course, Egypt is full of chaplains, but very few have had the privilege that I have had on the train. I meet the dear fellows in the street, and their demonstrations of affection are quite embarrassing sometimes. I broke up on the boat coming over. I think the strain was more than I knew.
It would have been a gut-wrenching experience for any man, and particularly for a priest who is concerned with the welfare, not just physical, but spiritual welfare of these men.
We want Bibles here very badly. You see, the long waits in the trenches are very long. They are very trying, and as we know, the men are waiting for, in some cases, the one clear call, and they know it.
The horror of seeing young men torn apart, gathering up human pieces after artillery and bombardment, and piecing them together for burial. I mean, this must have been a most horrific experience.
At 8:30, Padre Teese and I worked right around, burying 19 dead. Only one man with identification disc on. The others hardly recognizable owing to decomposition. Later I buried the sergeant from the sandhill after taking off his late wife's wedding ring from his little finger.
A lot of his letters talk about time in the trenches with the troops, time in the sand, on horseback, in the desert. He was very much a soldier's soldier.
We had an early start into enemy country. At the top of a steep sand rise, we saw below us a camp of tents among date palms, quite deserted. I found a large map torn in half, with penciled positions marked. That evening, the horses of the 2 battalions were watered until the well ran dry. We shared our last food, cleaned our rifles, and at night turned into sleep. Men stood at watch every 2 hours along outlying pickets. I wondered how the men could stand another night without sleep, as nearly all of them were on outpost duty the night before, watching for attacks. Men's eyes were getting very bloodshot.
Maitland-Woods is very warm. What's revealed in his letters is his lovely empathy and his humanity and his modesty, I think, his humility.
Found 2 tins of peaches in the sand and punctured it and passed it along among the men. Peaches! The Bedouins have been here taking things and hiding in the sand what they could not carry off.
The papers of Maitland-Woods are a wonderful thing to have in the John Oxley Library because they contain letters from Maitland-Woods to his Anglican colleague, the Reverend Canon David John Garland, and they contain letters from Garland back to Woods.
I was and am immensely proud of your entrusting to me the first flag hoisted in Gallipoli. I have taken it over the country for recruiting marches.
What I can gather from his correspondence with Canon Garland, they worked very closely together because their parishes joined each other in Brisbane. They were very close friends.
I met a crowd of Queenslanders, 25th Battalion, men who knew you well. I told them I was writing to you shortly, and they asked me to tell you that I had met them. They said, he knows how to talk to a soldier, and the others said, "My word," which is Australian for Amen. Spencer Brown has told me how you are pushing ahead with the Soldiers Club, and I hope it is going strong yet.
He spent a great deal of time administrating and organising on the behalf of soldiers. He set up soldiers' camps and soldiers' huts and social clubs for soldiers to really, I guess, keep them on the straight and narrow. He was very concerned for their spiritual welfare.
The Bible to Garland was the handbook of values on which the British Empire was based. Mr. Gladstone, the Prime Minister of England, said the same thing. And nations that didn't do that, like Imperial Germany, were the enemy. They were the Antichrist. His
input, to a large extent, determined what form Anzac Day would take and what flavour it would have. So it was always intended that the day be a solemn reflection.
They were doing their duty to God, King and country. This was the mantra of those days.
What you have in Green's diaries is a fairly frank account of what he sees around him, which doesn't carry with it any sense of him being a sanctimonious, self-righteous person. What Green records is the building of this camaraderie around the particular experience that these men are going through.
We were great mates there. If you didn't want to be there, it was fairly easy to get away from the place. Quick shot in the foot, if you know what I mean. But those who remained, they helped and loved each other, and then as time went on, the comradeship deepened. Perhaps the fellowship was fostered by the thought that we were all in it, together.
Greens also are very empathetic. He also writes from the trenches. Different, he's more of an officer's chaplain. Maitland-Woods is very much a soldier's chaplain.
You have to be strong-minded to write a diary under those circumstances. He may have found a certain amount of solace in doing that, but he certainly wasn't an abstainer.
Monday, May the 24th, was the day of the armistice, where we could bury our dead that was such a menace to the health of the soldiers. Cotton wool in my nostrils and the occasional nip of rum fortified me for the ordeal. In most cases, the only form of identification were their boots. And so I could only distinguish them either as Australian, New Zealander, or Tommy.
You know, there's no relief from that. So there's enormous pressure on these men. And it's sometimes a case too where these men, they actually lose their faith. And they ask questions of themselves, how could our God allow this to happen? You don't get a sense of any of that going on with Green.
When you have a situation of war, this is clearly a violation of God's will for humanity. And you've got to accept the reality that there are enemies who are going to kill you. Despite the cost, in the end there will be peace, the peace of Christ. This is a theology of redemption that is at the centre of Christianity.
I think unfortunately religion and war often go hand in hand throughout history. I think religion is often as much the cause of war as it is the salve of war. I think chaplains, regardless, played a tremendously important role in offering emotional and spiritual comfort to the men to whom they were assigned, and I think their role can't be underestimated. I think they saved some of those boys out there.